Hey, and welcome back. It's pretty well known that I have a somewhat severe case of gear acquisition syndrome, and I also have a strong affinity for Gretsch drums. I'm always keeping my eyes peeled not only on sites like Reverb and buy and sell groups, but also the wide variety of drum shops around the country that mostly specialize in vintage gear. One of the drums that I've been looking to add to my collection is a 70s to 80s Gretsch wood snare with a deeper shell. I found a number of drums ranging from 6.5 to 8 inches deep, but typically these drums seem to be going for close to or even over $1,000. A few months back, I was scrolling through my Instagram feed and saw a photo posted by one of my favorite shops, Junk Rock Drums. I saw what looked to be a 14 by 6.5 inch stop sign badge drum, and when I went to their Reverb store, I couldn't find it anywhere. I decided to reach out directly, and when I spoke to the owner, Michael, he let me know it was a drum that they took in not too long ago and just hadn't had a chance to restore or prepare to sell yet. After a bit of discussion, he agreed to give me a really good price if I'd be willing to do all the restoration work myself, and I gladly accepted. So after a week or so, the drum arrived and I was able to open it up and get my first in-person look at it. And overall, this drum was in pretty good shape. Yes, the hardware was a bit crusty and the shell showed its age, but really I didn't foresee too much work beyond needing to give everything a good cleaning. The snare throw was in good working order, and the butt plate seemed to work fine, aside from the adjustment screw being bent at the head. The internal muffler was present and also working, and that famous drum key holder / vent hole even had the standard issue Gretsch drum key with it. The top hoop on this drum was a triple flange and clearly unoriginal, but the bottom hoop seemed to be the correct die cast that would have come with this drum originally. A few days later, I finally made the time to dig in and started this project like any other, removing tension rods, hoops, heads, and then digging into all of the hardware mounted to the shell. Now, if I'm working on a modern drum, I'll usually use a drill with a drum key attachment, and that'll speed up this process by a lot. But when it comes to working on vintage drums that I haven't seen before, I'll usually do this all by hand, just to make sure there's no friction in the threads. A drill or driver can tear through that stuff really easily and ruin it, so it's worth the extra time to go slow and be cautious the first time around. Once I had everything removed, I could get a really good look at the shell, and this is a great chance to inspect any color change over the years, because typically the finish will look a lot fresher under the lugs and other hardware due to it not being exposed to decades of light. Also, once I got inside the shell, I saw that a previous owner decided to Sharpie out the script on the paper tag saying the shell is guaranteed for life, so I guess that officially voids the warranty on this 40 to 50-year-old drum. Next, I began the process of cleaning hardware, and my favorite way of doing this is to just soak it in a bath of WD-40 for about a day. I find that this typically takes away any surface debris and some of the light rust, even without scrubbing too much on the hardware. While waiting for the hardware to soak, a package showed up with a new old stock Gretsch die-cast hoop that I found on Reverb. I was able to make an offer a bit lower than the asking price, and got this for just under $75 with shipping and tax. After getting a chance to inspect it a bit closer, it seemed to be a perfect match with the snare side hoop this drum came with. Once the hardware had enough time to soak, I removed it from the container and took some time to scrub everything with a wire brush and hand dry with a towel. And in case you haven't noticed yet, there's well over 100 individual pieces to clean, so I recommend finding a good podcast or movie to have on in the background while you work. While I let everything sit to air dry even more, I took the butt plate upstairs to see if I could correct the bent adjustment rod. For this, I put it in my vise with a set of soft jaws to avoid tearing up the threads, and when I tightened it down, I then took a set of pliers with soft jaws and tried to bend it back into place. After a bit of time trying to do this by hand, I realized I needed something with a bit more power, so I grabbed a small hammer and pounded it back straight with the threaded rod. With the butt plate now fixed, I went back downstairs and did one final cleanup of all the hardware with some aluminum foil. This probably wasn't totally needed, but it only took me maybe 5 minutes to go over everything, and it's just so much easier to spend the little extra time now rather than to have to take any pieces off later if I notice I missed something. Next, I turned my attention over to the shell. I set up a little workstation off of my desk with a 2x4 and some clamps, and then proceeded to spray the shell with a bit of soapy water and take a microfiber cloth to scrub out any buildup and remove any dust. After going over the shell a few times, I came back with a magic eraser to dig in a bit more on some stubborn spots, and mostly I found this to be where the head collar would sit over the edge of the shell. For my final pass over the shell, I took this fretboard cleaner and rubbed it onto the shell and then wiped away the excess with a towel. This isn't something I do regularly, but I got this fretboard cleaner for free years ago, and it seems to just be a lemon oil cleaner that does a nice job of cleaning and conditioning a wood surface. With the shell now clean and ready to go, I just needed to clean up these hoops before beginning reassembly. The hoop I just purchased was in really great shape, but as you can see here, the snare side hoop that came with this drum originally was pretty dusty and had a fair amount of chrome flaking. I went over it with some steel wool, and with just a few minutes of working at it, it cleaned up really nice. After that, I went over both hoops with some soapy water and the cloth to clean up any leftover dust or debris from the steel wool. And now with everything cleaned up, I could finally begin reassembly. I began with the lugs, and with this drum having separate lugs for the top and bottom side of the shell, it ended up being 20 total, with 2 screws apiece, so this took quite some time. I got everything on the batter side just finger tight, and then shifted over to reattaching the internal muffler. After that, I screwed everything in nice and tight, and flipped over to the reso side and repeated the same process of attaching all the lugs finger tight and coming back with a screwdriver to secure them in place for good. Next, I added the air vent drum key holder back in place, and then shifted over to the final 2 pieces, the strainer and butt plate. Before securing the butt plate, I thought it would be wise to add some white lithium grease to the threads to keep it friction-free and prevent it from stripping down the road. And after attaching both the butt plate and snare strainer back to the shell, I could shift my attention over to the drum heads. I knew that I wanted to try something different for this drum, so I went over to my local music store and visited my friend Ryan and let him pick out a head for me to try. We settled on this Emperor X coated, as it was a lot thicker and would hopefully allow me to get some beefy lower tunings that I'd want for this drum. Before I seated the heads, I added some bearing edge conditioner to fill any voids in the current bearing edge, and of course, I also added some white lithium grease to the tension rods to get them nice and lubricated. For the resonant side, I used the standard issue Ambassador Hazy, and for the snare wires, I used some 20-strand wires I already had on hand. And with this drum now ready to go, I went over into my studio to set up my drums for recording, and just as I got everything set up and mic'd, I realized I wasn't going to be able to record because the butt plate had stripped and wouldn't hold any tension on the snare wires. I guess this is a pretty common issue on these older Lightning butt plates, so I cut my losses and ordered the new identical replacement from Cymbal Fusion. I appreciate that Gretsch offers these, and that they match the same hole pattern as the vintage throws, and as an added bonus, it tightens down the snare cord with a tension rod style head instead of a flathead screwdriver. While I replaced the butt plate, I figured it would also be a good time to swap the head and try something else, because the super thick Emperor X just didn't have a very natural feel to me, so I swapped this head out for the one that came with this drum originally, which was a coated single ply. After a week or so of messing around on this drum, I decided to swap out the head one more time, but this time I purchased a Remo controlled sound, which seemed to be a nice middle ground between the 2 other heads I had just tried. And for those worried that I wasted the first head that I bought, don't worry, because I threw that head on my Black Beauty style drum, and it works great on there. So finally, after all the setbacks, I was able to take this drum into my studio and set it up to record a proper demo. I knew this drum was destined for some serious rock and roll, so I swapped out my fusion-sized drums for my big rock kit. I recorded demos of this snare at 3 different tunings, with and without the internal muffler on, and after that, I added a few stylized playing demos, just to show you how I think this one fits into my collection. And of course, once all of the demos play through, I'll come back and give you my final thoughts on this drum. All in all, I think this drum has something different to offer from a lot of my other drums that I own and use regularly. The 6.5-inch wood shell really stands out and has some nice tonal depth to it. One thing that I love about vintage drums is that most of them have some sort of internal muffling system. I find them really convenient, but I did notice when I had the muffler disengaged in the lower tunings, I could hear a slight rattle, so maybe I'll need to muffle that up with a cotton ball in the spring or something like that. But luckily, I enjoy this drum most when it's tuned lower with the muffler on to control the overtones, so that keeps it from creating any excess noise or rattle. When it came to tuning this drum, I found it challenging to get just right, but I think that's mostly because I'm no pro at lower tunings, and it's very much something I need to work on. I think another reason that I struggle to tune this drum is due to the 10-lug layout. I'm most comfortable on an 8-lug snare, and feel very confident knowing how much my turn of a key will affect the drum's pitch, but with 10 lugs, I just don't have the same confidence of knowing exactly how much I'm doing when I twist the drum key a half turn. As I mentioned before, I'm no expert on lower tunings, and my background as a jazz drummer doesn't require me to get into those sounds as frequently. I did notice when I was really laying into this drum and playing a lot of rim shots, I could feel the tension slipping and the pitch lowering, so maybe I need to invest in some lug locks to help with keeping those lower tunings consistent throughout an entire tracking process. My only other complaint about this drum deals with the lightning throw-off and butt plate. I'm much more used to a fixed butt plate and a throw-off with an adjustment knob for tension, and although I do think this design is really well done, it's just not something I'm used to yet, so I've found it taking way more time to get the snare wire set up in a nice balance position. In the end, I really do enjoy this drum, and I think it fits into the collection of the other drums I own really well. For me, when it comes to acquiring vintage drums, they tend to be more temperamental and maybe not as versatile as a modern drum, but when you get a vintage drum tuned and set up in its sweet spot, it's truly something special. Big thanks to Michael Windish and Junk Rock Drums for getting this one into my hands, and make sure to go check them out and support your local drum shop either in person or online. I'd love to hear what you think about this drum, so leave a comment down below and let me know. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel to stay up to date on future video releases. And until next time, thanks.